Today, we're going to look at 3 places you can't go and people who went there anyways. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's doomsday bunker and remove all the labels on their canned goods so they have no idea what they're eating. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. Late on the night of Friday, September 18th, 2015, a 45-year-old man named Lattori Barman stumbled down a pitch-black street in a small village in central India. Lattori was stumbling because he was very, very drunk. He and his wife had spent most of the night together out at this local fair, having loads to drink and partying, and then at some point his wife had actually broken off and gone to her parents' house in another village, but Lattori had decided to stay out and keep the fun rolling. And so once she was gone, Lattori had gone to a liquor store and had more to drink there. And then now he had finally decided he had had enough, he was extremely intoxicated, and he just wanted to get back home. And so as Lattori stumbled down this road, he could really only see maybe a foot in front of him. Not only because he was so drunk, but also because the streets in his village did not have lights, and so it was totally dark. However, this wasn't unusual for Lattori. I mean, this is where he lived. He'd walked the street many, many times and knew how to navigate without any lighting. And so he just continued walking along, business as usual. But what did strike him as odd is that, late at night here, as he's making his way home, he thought it was weird that there was a lot of people out on the road. He couldn't really see them because, again, there's no lighting, but he could definitely hear them. Like there was people sort of all over the place. And he also sort of in his intoxicated state saw some lights that, maybe were vehicles sort of moving around. So there was like more activity on this road than usual. But at the same time, this is a main road and sometimes there's lots of people and cars on it, even late at night. So this didn't really strike him as odd enough to stop and investigate. He just kept on walking towards his house. But as he's walking through with all this commotion all around him, at some point he goes to step, but instead of his foot striking the ground again, there's nothing there. And suddenly he feels himself falling and he smashes into the ground, and now truly it's pitch black. He can't see anything, and he blacks out. The following morning, a group of villagers were walking down the same street that Lattori had been on the night before, and as they were walking, now in broad daylight, they looked up ahead and they noticed something odd right in the middle of the street. And at first they had no idea what it was, and so they walked closer to it to get a better look. And as they walked up on this thing, they instantly understood what it was. And they screamed and ran to tell authorities. It would turn out the reason Lattori was hearing and seeing all these people and vehicles on the street the night before, which seemed sort of out of place, was because there was actually a construction crew repairing potholes in that road. This road was known for being very dangerous because of these deep potholes. And Lattori, as he was stumbling along, accidentally fell into one of these deep potholes, smashed the ground, and was knocked unconscious. And because this worksite was so chaotic and there was all this, movement and there was bad lighting, none of the crew saw Lattori fall in. And Lattori, even after, coming to inside the hole, was too drunk to get out of the hole. And so at some point that night, the construction crew reached the pothole that Lattori was in. They didn't see him, and they poured molten tar into the hole and then rolled over it with a roller, all with Lattori inside the hole. And so after they were done and moved on to the next pothole, Lattori, in his final moments, tried to kind of pull himself out of this tar, but he only managed to get his hand up and out of the tar. And so the next day, the group of villagers that walked down the road, what did they see? They saw Lattori's hand poking out of the ground. Lattori's body was removed from the street and he was given a proper burial. There were 2 construction workers who were on duty on the night of Lattori's death who were ultimately arrested and charged with culpable homicide. As for Lattori's family, authorities would give them a compensation payment for Lattori's death, but it was only worth approximately $760. Last year, we launched a brand new podcast here at Ballin Studios called Redacted, Declassified Mysteries with Luke LaManna. and so far you guys have loved it. And in case you haven't heard, we also launched a YouTube channel for Redacted, where you can not only listen to these episodes, but also watch the beautiful animations we've done for each of these episodes. That channel already has 150,000 subscribers and it's growing really quickly, and there are hours of content available right now for you to binge. New uploads to this YouTube channel will be every single Tuesday. All you have to do is look up @Redacted Mysteries on YouTube, and I'll also be putting a link in the description below. Wondery Plus subscribers can also watch Redacted on the Wondery app. Okay, back to the stories. Around 2:30 p.m. on November 28, 2015, a man pulled into his driveway in the extremely rural city of Huron, California. He had been away overnight, and so as soon as he got out of his car, he walked right up to his porch and checked his doorknob to make sure his door was still locked. He found that it was, which was a relief. Then he unlocked it and stepped inside. However, as soon as he was inside his house, he just stopped and listened and kind of looked around. So this neighborhood that he lived in was not a safe place to live. In fact, over the past year, this guy's house had been broken into multiple times. However, he had not reported any of these break-ins to the police because he himself was wanted for felony drug possession. And so instead of getting the police involved, the man had sort of begun doing his own home security. Basically, every time he came home, he would sort of take a minute, listen, make sure nobody was in the house, and then actually sweep the house to make sure, nobody was there and that nothing had been stolen. And so as the man stood there in his doorway listening, he couldn't hear anything and nothing looked disturbed inside of his house. So he flipped on the lights, he walked into his living room and put his keys and his wallet down. And then he began doing this kind of systematic sweep through his house, checking to make sure there was nothing wrong. Checked the windows, none were broken, goes to the back door, it's still locked. He's in his kitchen, he's in, his dining room, there's nothing out of place. He did notice, however, that his mail that was sitting on one of his tables looked like maybe it had been rummaged through, but at the same time, he couldn't remember if maybe he had been kind of sloppy when he had gone over his mail before he had left the night before. So he didn't know if the mail was a sign of a break-in, but it didn't seem like it. And so after completing his sweep and feeling confident that the house was, in good order, he sat down and he relaxed. And he felt like, it had been a while since the last break-in and maybe he was being a bit too paranoid. But for now, he decided, his security protocol was good enough and he wouldn't make any changes quite yet. And he just picked up the remote, turned on the TV, and settled in for the night. However, after only a couple of minutes, the man realized his house was pretty cold and he was starting to shiver. So he stood up and he walked over and he turned on his heat. Then he sat back down on his couch. And then, about a minute later, this awful, high-pitched scream ripped through the house. It would turn out the homeowner's paranoia around break-ins was totally justified because the night before while he was gone, someone had tried to break into his home. 19-year-old Cody Caldwell had snuck onto the roof and attempted to enter this man's house through the chimney. But he got stuck about halfway down. And when the man came home and did his safety patrol and checked his house and couldn't hear or see anything, what he didn't realize was Cody was still absolutely stuck in the chimney and alive. He just wasn't making any sound. And then when the homeowner got cold and turned on the heat, what he literally did was he started an actual fire in his fireplace. And after setting this fire, Cody, who's wedged in the chimney right above this fire, began breathing in the smoke, and in his panic, he began to wiggle around and sink further and further down into this chimney, which is angled, and so he would have gotten more and more stuck until he was basically in the fire and then caught on fire. That scream was him burning alive inside of the chimney. And the man who owned the house had no idea what was going on. He just heard these screams. And then finally, when he got the fire put out and he called the police and the first responders showed up, it was already too late because Cody had died from severe burns and smoke inhalation. On the evening of January 19th, 2022, a 40-year-old mother named Anna Uskova set up a camera and some lights at the edge of a clearing in the woods in St. Petersburg, Russia. Then she focused the camera on the spot in the clearing where she, her husband, and her children were about to perform a very important religious ceremony. So to set the scene here, it was late at night, so it's dark, it was snowing, it's totally freezing. This is the dead of winter out in the middle of Russia. This is a cold, cold environment. But this is when this ceremony was done. In the dead of winter, all over Russia. This was not just something Anna's family was doing, this is like a Russian thing. On this day, all over the country, people would perform this sort of purification ritual that was designed to revitalize their bodies and souls and help them ward off evil spirits for the new year. Now, typically, Anna and her family would perform this big ceremony in a group setting with their church. But this year, Anna decided she wanted to hold this ceremony privately, with just her family kind of out in the woods by themselves. It would be more intimate, and the kids would feel, a bit more involved than they normally did. And so far, it was going great. They had found the perfect location. It was stunningly beautiful. It really felt like the best place to perform the ceremony. But it was kind of odd that when they got there, there was no other families there. They had this place to themselves, which was just crazy, but they thought, great, this is even better for us. This is gonna be the perfect ceremony. So while Anna's husband finished prepping everything they would need, Anna hit record on the camera, and then Anna walked out from behind the camera, and you see her come into frame, and she walks over to her kids. And now her kids are gonna be performing this ritual the same way Anna and her husband would be, and it's clear they're pretty nervous. Now, they've done this before, but still, this ritual is not very comfortable. It doesn't feel very good, at least in the moment. And so Anna knew this, and so she knelt down with her kids, and she kind of reassured them that they were brave, they were courageous, they could do this, and she was gonna go first. And they could see that, once mom did it, they would know that they could do it too. And so at some point, after kind of giving her kids a pep talk, Anna stood up, she walked over to the area that was designated for this ceremony, and then as the camera's rolling, she stood there, she drew a cross on her chest, then she stepped forward and kind of jumped feet first, and then disappeared. 1 second passed with no sign of Anna, and that was okay. But then 2 seconds passed and there was still no sign of Anna. And then 3 seconds passed and still no Anna. And at that point, her husband and her kids began to scream. So what Anna and her family didn't understand, or at a minimum just did not fully appreciate, was that when they did this ceremony with their church every year, the church took a lot of effort to make sure the location they chose for the ceremony, that it was totally safe. And on top of that, they often had medical personnel on standby, just in case. But Anna and her family had not done either of those things. The location they chose was no doubt stunningly beautiful, but the reason it was deserted is it was a terrible spot for this ceremony. And then also, they didn't have any medical personnel on standby. The ceremony that Anna and her family were taking part in is known as the Russian Orthodox Epiphany, and it's a type of baptism. Basically, people all over Russia at this time of the year will carve a cross-shaped hole in the ice over a body of water, and then one by one, they'll jump into the water and then emerge again, baptized, purified. And so Anna and her family had done that. They had carved the cross in this frozen body of water. But the reason this spot was a terrible spot to do this ceremony and why it was totally deserted is because they had chosen a raging river. That yes, it's frozen, but underneath, that river is still flowing, and it's a very deep river. And so the second Anna stepped into the water feet first, she got swept away. But they didn't have a way for her to re-emerge. It's all frozen ice. And so the second she went under into the pitch black water, she was gone. And within a couple of seconds, her family is expecting her to come back up again, but of course she didn't. And so they began screaming, and Anna's husband actually leapt into the water, but he actually stopped himself really quickly because he felt that current pulling him. And so he got out, and very quickly, a search was launched for Anna, but there was no hope. They couldn't find her, and in fact, to this day, they still have not recovered her body. In case you haven't heard yet, our newest graphic novel, Mr. Ballin Presents Where Nightmares Live, is available for pre-order right now. It contains another 9 heart-stopping, strange, dark, and mysterious stories, all based on real events. This was a passion project. It took a lot of time, a lot of people involved, from the artwork to the storytelling. I mean, this is a beautiful piece to add to your collection, so you gotta check it out. The book comes out on September 30th, but again, you can pre-order your copy at book.ballinstudios.com, or you can click the link in the description below. There are a limited number of hand-signed copies available, but those are gonna sell out very quickly. So please pre-order today, because remember, your nightmares are waiting. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya.